William Charles Jones, Chuck to those who knew him best, was a 48-year-old from Milford, Ohio. He was divorced and had 2 children. On January 31st, 2009, Chuck got dropped off at the facility where he lived after celebrating his birthday with family. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Denzel, and this is Unfound. Despite what I do here, I don't speak to many police officers. Why is that? Well, as I like to say, I'm in the information business. If somebody isn't going to tell me things I don't already know, to be frank, I don't have much use for that person. Not being cold, that's just the way it is. With police, they're the same way. They are also in the information business. They're about collecting facts, not disseminating them. And when you see that both myself and the police are both takers of information and not givers, well, you can see why our paths don't cross very often. The funny thing is, this podcast has helped police more than is publicly known. In fact, police have requested quite a bit of info from me over the past 9 years. For such disappearances as Jansen Brewer's and Dallas Braden's, Erica Hall's, and Peggy and Patty McDaniel's. Well, with Chuck Jones, I see a bit of a change as police start to more and more embrace what podcasts can do to help them. Thus, you get to hear an interview with the investigator. And now a summary of the case. William Charles Jones, we'll just call him Chuck from now on, was like any other young man growing up in Ohio. He was into sports, baseball cards, stuff like that. He had a brother and a sister, and Chuck was close with both of them. Chuck got married, and he was the father of a boy and girl. He had a steady job as the baker at a Dunkin' Donuts. Yum. But then the problems started. Chuck began to exhibit signs of mental illness, such as paranoia and suicide talk. This condition led him to not being able to hold the donut job. This then led to a divorce, and it got so bad that even though Chuck was only in his mid-40s, he moved to an assisted living facility in Milford. He seemed to like it there, although his mental health problems continued. So, on January 31st, 2009, Chuck was taken out for his birthday by his brother and sister-in-law, along with a niece of theirs who was just 6 at the time. Chuck was his usual self, and they had a good time. He was given a present and a cake. After eating, they dropped Chuck off at the facility with those items. He was never seen again. Not until almost a week later did anyone realize Chuck was missing. When his room was inspected, his wallet along with the present and the cake were on his bed. Nothing was missing. No witnesses reported seeing him leave. Police searched the nearby river, but found nothing. As long as Unfound exists, mental health issues will be a topic. Pretty sure. The problem is that although these issues can lead to people choosing to disappear, people with those problems can be disappeared by others as well. Contemplate how we might go about discerning one from the other, while you also try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1, in your mind, does the day being Chuck's birthday have some significance in this case? Number 2, what are you to make of Chuck's ex-wife's boyfriend being on the facility property not long after Chuck went missing? And number 3, how do you reconcile the idea that Chuck most likely went into the river with the locals' insistence that there is no way an overweight man like Chuck could have done so? Chuck's family tends to believe he went into the river, but there is no consensus. The guest for this episode is an administrative officer with the Milford Police Department, Jeff Heggie. Unfound news. I am very sad to report that the remains of Chance Engelbert have been identified on the outskirts of Gering, Nebraska. The investigation will continue, but foul play is not suspected at this time. His disappearance was featured on Unfound in June of 2021. Sympathies go out to his friends and family. Next, I know it's been a while, but I will be appearing on Dr. Telesco's show on November 6th at 7 p.m. Eastern on her YouTube channel. We will be discussing disappearance statistics. It will be great to see the good doctor. Finally, I finished the book 2020 Vision, which allegedly could be connected to the disappearance of Ray Griecar. It certainly is not connected, and I would give it about 2 stars out of 5 on the Amazon rating scale. Poor story and poor writing, in my opinion. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound an administrative officer for the City of Milford Police Department, Jeff Heggie. Jeff, welcome to Unfound.
Well, thanks, Ed. I appreciate that.
Let's start here. Now, everybody should know we're doing this interview on October 21st of 2025. Let's start here. Just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, and of course, then we'll get into how you were first introduced to. We're gonna call him maybe Chuck for this interview. How you came in to find out about this disappearance, but tell the listeners a little bit about yourself first.
Okay, I am a second-generation police officer. My dad was a police officer and a fire chief in a small town in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I always grew up around police officers and firefighters. And around 1994, I decided to become a police officer myself. And I worked for a small agency, switched over to another small agency, and then in 2019 I retired. And then was offered a part-time job at Milford Police Department as the administrative officer in 2023. So I came over here, and then that's when that's where it led into this. But over the years as a police officer, I did do investigations. I was promoted to a lieutenant. I supervised investigations. Was over a K-9 unit, bike patrol, narcotics. And then over here was when, and it wasn't when I first learned of Chuck's case. I actually learned of it while I was at the other agency, and kind of poked around back then. But when I got here, I began looking at it out of curiosity at first. And then because I noticed it hadn't been worked on in a couple of years, and I had free time here and there between what I do for my duties here. I asked if I could work on it during any spare time that I had. So it was coming up in 2023. It was coming up around the 15th anniversary of his disappearance. So I just felt that we needed to get active on this case again and see what we could come up with after all these years.
Yeah. How would you term an administrative officer? Obviously, I guess you're retired, you have your pension and everything. Congratulations for you. But how would you term an administrative officer? Kind of a part-time job where they kind of just give you things that are out there, or how would you say that you come across? I'm guessing you do other things for the department, but how is that assigned to you? What would you say an administrative officer does?
So here I am basically like an administrative assistant to the assistant chief. So my responsibilities are like vehicle maintenance, fleet maintenance. I'm the property room custodian for the department, so I handle the evidence and property.
Wow.
I do some inspections on the body cameras and the car cameras. I do public records requests for videos and redactions. Mainly those kind of things. I assist basically anywhere I'm needed. Other than that, I write grants, research grants, such as that. That's mostly. I don't work the road. I'm done with that.
Thank goodness, right?
Yeah, I have no interest in that anymore, especially the last couple of years. So
Yeah.
But that's what I do here. And then like I said, they gave me the opportunity where I can work on Chuck's case when I have time, and so it's a good position for a retired officer.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right. Very good. Thank you for that. And when you were a police officer before you retired, you were in Milford or you were in other cities in Ohio? How would you explain that?
Well, I actually started at the same agency that my dad had been a police officer in Deer Park, and then I met I had a friend that I worked with in a local drug unit, and he worked at an agency nearby called Madeira, and I went there, and that's where I worked until I retired. And then I came over here to Milford about 2 or 3 years later.
Okay. Very good. All right. Thank you. Please.
It's all in the greater Cincinnati area.
Yeah.
Of Ohio.
Right. Right. Of course, I have looked up Milford on a map, and I know that area. I have looked that up. So, yes, those familiar with the area. At least now I'm familiar with that area. Okay. Just in general, being that you did you have a lot of experience when you were a police officer before you retired? Did you have a lot of experience? And we don't have to get into any depth in this, but I'm just wondering what kind of disappearance investigation experience did you bring to Chuck's disappearance, and did it come from when you were a police officer for 25 years or however long it was?
Well, the main part when you're a patrol officer, you do get called to missings and runaways over the course of your career. So in general, those kind of cases I got called to, but mostly they were the type where it was a runaway that normally ran away every other weekend and showed back up on Monday or Tuesday if we couldn't locate them, or a patient left a facility in town and we found them on the road late, walking down the street later on, those kind of things. I had a few over the years where one at Deer Park where the individual did disappear and was not located for several years, and unfortunately he was found deceased. But that was when I first started, and I didn't have a lot of experience with that. And I can't remember if we had an investigator then and what all was done on that case. Because I don't remember doing a whole lot other than stuff that I could do as a patrol officer.
Right.
But mostly those kind of cases. So obviously not an expert, but generally investigations are all handled the same. With just an emphasis on certain parts of missing cases, and especially cold cases. There's a lot you have to look at differently. Right. So I started getting involved with this kind of thing. Obviously, I found it. I started reading some books on cold case investigations. We all have seen forensic shows, so cold case and those kind of things. And I'm a pretty avid listener of podcasts, and one of my favorites was the consult. I was always interested in the behavioral analysis unit.
Yes.
So that's how I actually found out about your podcast, was through Julia's podcast over there.
That's right.
So
And the
that's
listeners
when
should,
I come.
yeah, and the listeners should know that Jeff and I have been talking for over a year, and in fact, I think the first time we spoke, I had destroyed my voice because I take singing lessons, and I don't know if you remember that conversation, but I could barely talk. Do you remember that, Jeff?
Yes, I do.
Ha!
Yes.
Yes. That was because I haven't lost my voice very often in my life. That was August of 2024 when we first spoke. And yes, I knew at the time that Julia had told you about me, and then here you are talking to me, and I can barely talk. So thank you for giving me a second chance, Jeff.
No problem. I think the issue at the time was whether or not our department wanted certain information out
Right.
there at the
That's
time.
right.
And then,
Of course.
you
Of
know,
course.
time passes by, and then when you recontacted me this year,
Yes.
I ran it by the chiefs again, and they're okay with it, and we kind of talked about it. So that's why we're here now.
For sure, and I appreciate that. And yes, that is true that I think you were still working on, you had to get some approvals, and I think there were still some things that you wanted to do. And then it was on my agenda to contact you this summer. And that's how we're now talking today, once again, on October 21st of 2025. And I do appreciate the powers that be in the department for allowing you to go on the record. And of course, we're here to help. I am not here to, we're going to talk about everything that we can talk about. And, we're here to try to help this investigation move it forward. We're not here, to get in the, I'm not here to get in the way of anything. So I'm here to help. And that is why you're talking with me today. And I appreciate it. So when you were an officer, were you aware of Chuck's disappearance back in 2009? I realize you were not in that jurisdiction, but when it happened and it was not resolved quickly, do you remember back at the time, 16 years ago, knowing about it, or did you not find out about it until you started working for Milford?
Well, I don't remember hearing it on the news or knowing anything about it through official channels.
Mm-hmm.
How I stumbled on it was, as an investigator, you can apply for access to the NAMUS, I can't think of what the...
Yeah, NAMUS is fine. Everybody, listeners know what that is. That's fine. It's the federal database. Sure, NAMUS. Sure.
Yeah, you get special law enforcement access to that. And then the first thing I did, of course, out of curiosity, I'm like, okay, what about all these locals? Are there any cases around here?
Mm-hmm.
That's just curiosity. We can't help ourselves. And that's when I saw Chuck's case, and there wasn't a whole lot of information on it at all. Mm-hmm. And I saw that he's never been found. I mean, it was an unsolved missing.
Right.
And, Milford, I knew the officer that was investigating. We were friends, through investigations over the years, and he's actually the chief of police here now. But so, I never got a chance to talk to him about it until I actually came over here. But I did know about the case, and I was curious about it back then.
Mm-hmm. And I guess
that's how I found out.
Please continue.
Oh, I just said that's how I found out about it.
Okay, great. So I guess what we're also saying here is this case, maybe even with, and I've talked about this before many times, this kind of disappearance, even in your experience of starting as a police officer in 94, then retiring a few years ago, fairly unique in that it's a disappearance that has lasted this long and still unsolved. Fairly unique for you.
Well, I would think well, most agencies, I would think it's unique for,
right.
At least I hope. But
right.
But this long, in this type of town, in the whole situation, just not having any information, this is a very unique missing case.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been finding out, looking through all the
right.
The loads of paperwork, and there's been over 8 different investigators that have worked this over the years.
Wow.
Reading through, what things they followed up on. Yeah, it's very unique, especially for this department.
And I want to continue before we're going to, of course, as we usually do, listeners should know, we're going to get into talking about Chuck, but being that we don't have too many police officers or former police officers, retired police officers, or administrative officers on the podcast, I feel compelled to ask you just a little bit more about your attitude, your experience, etc. When you're confronted with something like this, what's going through your head? Do you come in with any preconceived notions about things from your investigative experience, your police experience? Or do you kind of come into something like this looking at Chuck's file for the first time, with the most openness of minds? How would you say that what your mindset is when you first open a file like this for the first time?
Okay. Well, the first thing you want to do, you do have to have an open mind, but you need to read. I mean, this is how I did it.
Okay.
I read every single document that I could find in the file, and then I looked for anything else we might have had stored on the computers or in storage, any photographs, anything I could consume to learn as much about the case as possible and what was done on the case over the years, and why. The hardest part sometimes is determine why they did certain things, because if it wasn't indicated in the report, I'm like,
right.
Well, what the heck were they following up on, or what lead
right.
led them to this? So, and then looking back over the years, when you're trying to find certain information, it's just not there anymore. The documents get destroyed. Public records has retention times, and then they can be destroyed. So, those are the different things. You have to go into it with an open mind, and then you start looking for holes that need to be filled.
Yeah.
And then with the investigative experience you bring that all these other investigators may not have had,
right.
That's the kind of thing I've tried to start looking at and adding to this, when I have the time. And those are the things, that's how I approach this. And then, like I said, I read up on cold cases and looked for other things that we may have overlooked over the years that we never did, that other investigators, most of the time when they write a book, they know what they're doing. Not always.
Sometimes.
But the ones I've read, they gave me some good ideas on this case that we can look into too.
Mm-hmm.
But time is the hardest thing to overcome on a cold case, because people are deceased now, reports are not, we can't find them, or an officer didn't document enough information, or why they were doing something, and I'm not blaming them. We all do this, and we look at a report at the time and we're like, well, that should explain it to anyone that reads it. And then you may get an opportunity years later to read it, and you're like, I don't know what I was trying to, you know what I mean? I'm like, I don't know what I was trying to point out here, but so then hopefully, and I went to some of these officers, because a lot of them still worked here. And I said, what were you trying to follow up on, or what was the point of this and that? So luckily, all of them still were working here at the time that I started on this. Now, a few of them have retired since, but I still have a lot of them. I can still get a hold of a lot of them over the years from what they did on the case. So there's good and bad to this case in this kind of thing, but most cold cases, you're really going to just start from the beginning again, and just as you think of something that you need to do, you look in the reports and see if it was done. Mm-hmm. And if it wasn't done, then you mark it down and say, I need to do this. Right. That's basically what you do. So, and you have, when you said open mind, you have to look at the scenarios here.
Yeah.
On is missing person accidental? Is it something that could have accidentally happened? Is it something with foul play, or was it something with a suicide? Yeah. I think those are just basically the three scenarios. There may be more, but I'm looking at this particular case. Those are the three possible scenarios of what happened here.
Yeah.
So we have to look at what leads us in the general directions of where we should focus most of our time on the investigation. And if that leads to a dead end that we can't find any more information, then we start looking at the other things and trying to fill any gaps there. But the most important part is to spend a majority of your time on where the information is leading to, and and then if it leads somewhere else, go that direction.
Well, if you can remember, and maybe this is a very important. How long have you been working on this now? As of October 2025, I realize you're part time, and I know you're not devoting every day to it. But when was the first time you opened up the file? Was like you were given the file and said, "Yeah, go ahead, Jeff, give it a shot."
It would have been probably late 23 and early 2024. So
Okay.
about a year now, maybe two. Well, this would be the second year, so almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years. Okay.
Yeah.
And if you can remember, when you got the file, would you say you already have stated maybe there were some things in it that weren't quite clear to you and you had to go back to a previous investigator? Would you say that the file was extensive, a lot of information in there? Or did you find, like we might say, well, there was still a lot of meat on the bone that could be done, starting in 2023 or 2024? Would you say that the file was pretty complete? Or would you say that there were things that you came up with that were like, oh yeah, these could be some new things to do?
Well, I just want to relate one thing with that. So
Yeah.
in Ohio, there's a Bureau of Criminal Investigation. It's a state agency that assists with missing persons and other investigations, but they have a missing persons unit. And I was at a class over the summer because I volunteer for a search team too, EquiSearch Midwest.
Okay.
And I thought this training would be important for that, so I went to that class, and one of the investigators from BCI was there. I think it was teaching a class on missing persons. I don't remember the exact class, and she was talking about how they could assist. And one of the things they could do was take your whole file and digitize it. So we're talking like when I first started on it, there's 5 binders, 2.5-inch binders of paper and pictures, and different investigators organize it in different ways, but a lot of times it's just in plots of, where you pull out a whole, like those page protectors. There might be 15, 20 things in that page protector, and you have to pull it out to go through and see what the documents were. So I scheduled with her to scan all these documents, and then she puts it into like a PowerPoint, they call it a splash screen, and then you're able to easily access the documents just by clicking some buttons on this. And when she was done and had read over a lot of what we had done, she said that she felt that Milford Police had done above and beyond anything that she had seen other agencies do on this type of case.
Great.
So, and with that in mind, though, I still was able to find things. I still believe there was some meat on the bones, like you said.
Yeah.
And that's what I did, was as I would see a document and there was something that I said, it doesn't look like it was followed up on, or a person that was never contacted, I jotted it down or put it on my whiteboard. And, I can't say I've even got all those done yet. I have a list like hanging on the wall here of things I still want to do.
Wow.
And I still find more the more I reread these documents that we can do before I would feel like there's nothing else we can do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I hate to say that, but there is going to be a point where I feel there's nothing else we can do.
Yeah.
If we don't find his remains, or someone doesn't tell us something, we may never know what happened.
Right. I know. And just so you know, Jeff, just for, statistics for my podcast, just to put this all in context, of course, Chuck's disappearance, almost 17 years old. You should know the average age of a disappearance that I feature on the podcast is like 23, 24 years old. So this Chuck's is actually on the low side. So, so I've covered a lot of disappearances that are still unsolved from the 90s, the 80s. And so when we start talking about 16, 17 years old, at least in my world, it's not that old. But of course, in investigation time, that's a long time. That's a long time. Like you stated, having to go back and find people. Luckily, a lot of these people, especially investigators, are still alive. You can have conversations with them. So in that way, maybe, you're very fortunate. This would be a lot tougher if Chuck went missing in 1981.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. There would be hardly anything left.
Yeah, right. Right. Okay. Very good. Thank you for, once again, because we don't have many people on the podcast of your type, of, your classification, your experience, I felt like I needed to, ask some questions like that. Very interesting to me, I think, and to the listeners as well. All right, let's, and of course, now everybody understands, of course, that Jeff did not know William Charles Jones, and we're calling him Chuck, did not know him personally, but we're going to start there anyway with this. What have you learned? And I know you've spoken to some of his family members. How much you want to say about that is totally up to you, Jeff. But what have you learned about Chuck? What was going on in his life at the time? His mental health, his physical health. What have you learned about him? And maybe even what do the files say?
Well, what I'm going to do is I wrote a brief victimology, and that's one thing I wanted to say.
Great.
The number one thing I noticed in this whole investigation was no one, and it is relatively probably a newer term in investigations, but it's basic police work. But especially with like the FBI, the BAU,
yes,
victimology is super important to
sure.
even begin the investigation.
Yes.
And noticed in our perspective of what was done in the case that no one had ever sat down and really wrote out a good victimology. And then in the course of doing so, I noticed we have not a lot of information that we do need. And I've been trying to gain more and more. So as I learn more, I try to add to the victimology.
Right.
So I'm just going to kind of read over a brief victimology of him. It's about a page and a half long, but it's easier for me to read it because I took
Go ahead.
to write it.
Please, whatever you have, that's great. Victimology, fantastic. Please.
So if it sounds robotic, it's because I wrote it.
That's totally fine. Don't worry about it.
All right. At the time of his disappearance, Chuck was 48 years old. He was unemployed and living at Sem Villa, which is an income-based retirement type of community, by himself. He had some physical health problems, such as high blood pressure and high cholesterol. He was overweight. He weighed about 300 pounds, and he was about 5'8" tall. He was diagnosed with some mental health disabilities of schizophrenia and depression, and those were diagnoses.
Okay.
And on occasion, he was delusional and had some suicidal ideations over the last 5 or so years before he went missing. Not too much is known of his childhood, other than he grew up and went to school in what is considered the Glen Estee area of Union Township, Claremont County, Ohio. Normal interest at that time, so growing up, was collecting baseball cards. He was interested in sports, concerts, and cars. So that era, that's typical. I think everybody growing up in that era was interested in those things.
Yeah.
He was described as quiet and friendly back then. He had a younger sister and an older brother and grew up in a 2-parent home in which he was living in that home after inheriting it from his parents' death. I think his father died. And then after his divorce. So he had moved back into his parents' home in that area just prior to moving into Sem Villa. So I don't have a whole lot of information of how he ended up at Sem Villa instead of staying at home. So that's something. There's another hole right there.
Right.
So as an adult, from what we know, he worked at Dunkin' Donuts in Miami Township for a long time as a baker. From there, I was told he met his future wife and married her in 1981. He had 2 children from that marriage, Amy and William. In the early 1990s, Chuck started to show signs of mental illness, mainly manic depression and schizophrenia. And that ended up leading to their divorce in 2003. In 2004, Chuck moved into Sem Villa in Milford. He had his own apartment in the basement, but he lived alone. He was free to come and go as he pleased and have visitors. But the only visitors that I've been told about were his daughter and maybe his sister and brothers, or family members would come visit, or he would go visit them.
Right.
Every once in a while, his daughter Amy was allowed to stay with him. I think Amy has some developmental disabilities.
Okay.
So she was allowed to stay with him as long as he kept his apartment clean. In general, his apartment was not clean, and it was in disarray. And the staff at STEM was at that point trying to find him some assistance with upkeeping the apartment. I guess they can find people to help with that kind of thing. He did not have a great relationship with his son, William, at the time. And I believe at that time William had entered into the military service just prior to Chuck's disappearance. So he was overseas during all of this. He continued to have bouts with depression and schizophrenia during the time at Sem Villa and was hospitalized on several occasions for this. A few times the doctors noted that the suicidal ideations of going for a swim in the river and hanging himself from a belt at a relative's home. But the last record I could locate of any of this was 2007, so 2 years prior to his disappearance. So I haven't been able to find any statistics on an actual, ideation, being a specific ideation and time of the last one with actual suicides, because that would be very interesting statistic to have. But I haven't been able to find anything like that out there to say whether, it would be 52% more likely to do it or not.
Right.
But so at SEM, he did have some friends, some that were on the staff there, and a few were residents, but no one was really close to Chuck that we could find. He was provided transportation to places where he received treatment and counseling, and he became friends with one of the transportation providers. Most of the staff described Chuck as a little unkempt and wore dirty clothes, mostly sweatpants. He made it to most of the meals that are provided by STEM in their cafeteria, so they have like a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Most of them said he seemed shy, like mostly a follower type. Now, these are from some questionnaires that I used recently, so that's why it's kind of a list. They said he was a loner, he did express concern for others, generally not happy, mostly passive, quiet, inactive, cautious, forgiving, nervous, mostly pessimistic, dependent on help, and straightforward, not a manipulative type of person. He did own a car for a short time while he lived at STEM, but the car was disabled in an auto accident in 2007. So after that, he just relied on transportation that was provided by STEM Villa and Claremont County. They have some transportation services for these types of residents. So his normal routine would have been mostly doctor's appointments. I know there was some mention of church and or a chapel on site that he'd visit, counseling sessions, for the depressions that he was fighting, and then he did have family visits either with him or they would visit. He would go with them or they would visit him. So it leads up to the date of his disappearance. So on Saturday, January 31st, 2009, it was Chuck's 48th birthday. And his brother James and his wife Helen and their 6-year-old niece were going to take him to dinner that night. So they picked him up from Sem Villa about 1:30 p.m., and they went to Cracker Barrel in Milford for dinner. He received a few gifts there and a small cake, and then they brought him back home to the apartment about 4 p.m., they said. And he was last seen taking those items into the building. So that was the last time that anyone ever saw Chuck on record that we could find. And the only possible clothing description from that day was given to us from the 6-year-old niece. And, he was in dark blue or black sweatpants, a light blue shirt, a lighter weight black jacket that may have had red or white on it somewhere, and black Velcro strap shoes. And then along with it, he wore eyeglasses. Those were never found either.
Wow.
But he had left the gifts and the cake on his bed, and his wallet and keys were on the table in his room when we were called to take the initial police report. So that's basically the victimology of Chuck at this time that we have.
Okay. Let me, that's all fantastic. I'm very impressed. I love all of it. I just want to ask you a couple questions that came to mind as you were going through this. Being that when you got involved, it wasn't until like 2023, 2024. A lot of this information, as far as talking to people there, that was done back in 2009, 2010. Or have you also personally gone over to Sem Villa to kind of do your own questioning as well?
Well, I know she doesn't want her name mentioned, so
yeah, we'll just I'll if you say her name, if you say it by mistake, I'll just delete it out in the when I listen to this again. So don't worry about it. Just don't say it too much to make it easy on me. But yes, we want to keep people's names who have helped out of this conversation. So you just do what you got to do, Jeff. I'm just wondering, the information you went through. Have you followed up? I guess what I'm asking, are there still people at Sem Villa who lived there at the time, remember Chuck, people who worked there, etc.?
Well, so far, and I haven't been able to dig into this so much, there are some staff members that were there when Chuck was there.
Okay.
That do remember him. I have not talked personally with them, but what I did initially with this case was I contacted the FBI. You have to contact a local liaison, and I did want to see if the BAU would look at this to offer maybe some suggestions on investigation, or even just say, hey, this just looks like a suicide, or hey, this part over here looks interesting, and you may want to follow up on this. But when they looked at it, they said it wouldn't qualify for them to review. So at that point, I did get some information from them, and one of them was a victim's questionnaire, because I'm really a believer in this victimology as the source of where you're going to find your leads. And the one they provided me is a little bit different. I contacted Julia recently by email, and she sent me a different one that I wish I would have had at this time. But so I talked to the administrator that had been there at the time. I don't know if that's her actual position. I'm just saying she's the administrator. I don't know if that's her position.
Okay.
And they had still had some notes from when Chuck lived there that they provided for me, and she was very helpful with contacting the staff, and I left these questionnaires for the staff. So I've not actually physically interviewed them face to face at this point, because I didn't know if there was any information to glean from them that the questionnaire wouldn't provide. So looking through these questionnaires, there may be one or two that I would go back and get in touch. But most of the friends that may have been at Sem Villa that he may have associated with at the time, the ones that I have looked into, I believe, are deceased now. So, and I don't think anyone ever talked to them over the years. But I do plan on hopefully getting maybe together with family members when I find out, some phone numbers and things like that,
right,
and seeing if they ever remember any mention of Chuck when he disappeared from the people that were friends at them. So that's something I'm going to look into. But there are still some staff members there, and they remember him, and that's where I got a lot of the personality, traits that I read about in the victimology there.
Okay. Just some additional questions. As best as you can tell, the Sem Villa place, does it have a pretty good reputation? Of course, we know we see this at least a few times a year. We have some facility that's supposed to be taking care of people, who are old or have health issues, mental health issues, in some sort of assisted facility, and you find out, that they're not doing their job. Would you say that Sem Villa has a pretty good reputation?
Well, yes, I would say they do, because we don't get calls up there for thefts from residents, things like that. Certain facilities, assisted living or nursing homes, we, at least at the other agency I worked for, we were always getting called for staff had stolen from residents or abusing residents. That's not the case at SIM. I can't say we've never had it, but since I've been here, I haven't heard of anything like that. Most of the calls for service at SIM are squad runs, normal course of, the type of people that are there, they tend to need life squad assistance more than anything. Occasionally we get called up for disputes, but it's never anything really involving staff or anything like that. It's a highly recommended facility, and it's very well maintained and taken care of.
Okay, very good. Of course, along those lines, a little bit off on a tangent on this, we have to remember that Chuck, at the time of his disappearance, was not that old. He was only 48 to be living in a, what we would carry, assistance facility. I'm 55, and I cannot imagine being in a place like that. Is there any determination of why Chuck needed to be there? Was it because of his mental health? Was it because of something else? With your victimology, the way you look at it, Jeff, any determination on that? Because it's very young, especially since it doesn't seem like he had any brain development disorders, anything like that. That it seemed like he was perfectly fine with his intelligence, his IQ, but he's still living in a place like that. Any insight into that?
Well, just reading through the notes from counselors and the visits to the hospital that the doctors had spoke of, and it just seems like he was mentally deteriorating. He was very anxious. If something happened to him, the staff said basically he would just keep going over that with the staff, just have them reassure him that everything, would work out. Like anytime he needed assistance with obtaining medications, or when he did wreck his car, he was worried about, everything being taken care of with the insurance, different getting to doctor's visits and setting up transportation. He seemed to be very dependent upon staff, and that's what they do there. So maybe that's normal. The thing that I don't understand was I think the divorce was because of his mental deterioration,
right?
And he was at his boyhood home, but at some point in the records that I was reading, his sister and brother-in-law were living there, and he with Chuck, and then somehow Chuck ends up being moved to Salem Villa, and they stayed at the residence. So I don't know what happened specifically that led to that. That's a hole in the investigation that I would like to know a little bit more about. But that's why, from what I could tell, he was unemployed, probably because of the mental health. I'm not sure.
Sure.
I haven't been able to find anybody that's worked with him yet, which I hope this maybe might generate some of that information on this podcast. But that's all I tell is basically he just had a need of more and more dependent on other people, and that's why he ended up in the facility, and that's what they do best. So,
I just felt that I needed to ask that question because, like I said, we know assistive facilities exist. A lot of them are fantastic. I think they are very good for many different types of people. It's just you don't hear too much about 48-year-olds being in a facility like that. So I wanted to follow up on that at least a little bit. All right, so of course you've gone through his victimology. You went through the timeline. He goes out with his brother's wife, and I guess their daughter. And, please.
I think it was their niece.
Their niece, okay.
Brother and sister-in-law's niece.
Okay, niece. And then they go out, come back, and drop him off, and seemingly he's never seen again. So let's just go from there. Of course, my understanding, and you can verify this or not, but it did take at least a little while for anybody to realize, though, that he was missing. Is that correct?
Yes. So after, apparently, now I am going to have to look notes on this.
Go ahead, please.
Just to get it definitely correct. But I know just from reading over some things, when he was back that night, I believe the sister called. So he had his own phone, not a cell phone. He had a landline phone, and called and left a message, and he didn't call her back that night. So that would have been Saturday night. And I believe at that time of year in Ohio, it gets dark at like 5 o'clock.
Sure. It's going to be dark, yeah.
She called probably to wish him happy birthday. There may have been other family members that called as well, but he never returned the phone call that night. So I believe on Sunday, I guess that would have been, the sister described it as Super Bowl Sunday, and that makes sense. Usually it's the first weekend in February.
Mm-hmm.
So she tried to call him several times that day, and I think Helen and Jim, the ones that took him to dinner, called because I guess she probably told them that she hasn't been able to get a hold of Chuck. So they called. Nobody responded, and let me look at some notes here.
Okay.
This might take me a minute.
Okay.
The transportation service would normally pick him up Monday through Friday to take him to a counseling center over in Amelia area. So he almost did that daily. They showed up on Monday to pick him up, and he wasn't there. And I did talk to the transportation personnel in person, and I'm trying to remember what she said, but she said, I don't think she checked his room that day, but I think she did call staff and ask why wasn't Chuck on the bus, and they had told her that they believed he had a doctor's appointment that another transportation service took him to. So that nobody actually checked, but that's the reason that it was kind of overlooked on that Monday.
Okay.
Tuesday, he wasn't there for the bus on Tuesday, and that lady that actually did went into staff, and I believe they checked his room, and he wasn't in the room that day. And then they learned from staff that Chuck wasn't at any of the meals.
Right.
And I think Wednesday, after the sister had kept calling, I think Wednesday the sister actually came to the facility and checked his room and then left a note for him to call her. And I think Thursday she might have came back again, and finally, I think, I'm trying to see what exact day they actually called us to make a report.
Okay.
The sister was the one that actually called the police to make the police report for the missing person. So let me just check. Sunday through Wednesday, calls were unanswered. So it says Sunday through Wednesday, Julie visited that's his sister, Chuck's apartment at least twice, and he wasn't there. I know the bus driver checked his apartment, maybe with Julie on one of those days too. And then Thursday, February 5th, was when the sister reported Chuck missing to law enforcement. So that's when we would have responded and taken the initial report.
So it took quite a while.
Yeah, we're talking the possibility of him being gone already like 4 or 5 days.
Wow. Okay.
So that's a long time.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely, for sure. And as is usually the case, there were indicators days before this that something wasn't right, but people, they rationalize things. Like this driver, well, he must have taken some other service or something. There's some rationalization that goes on, several times by family members and friends too. And then at some point it just becomes unavoidable that somebody is missing. Is that the way you interpret it?
Yes, and that's what it seems to be. There were, I believe the bus driver checked with the staff, and they thought he'd taken another service to the doctor that day, but no one actually checked. And that happens. I think the sister was the one that started showing the most concern, and I don't know what. Obviously she showed up and tried to find him a couple times, and he wasn't there. And then on Thursday, I got to call the police.
Right.
So she called. So that's when it was she was definitely, the Chuck isn't here. He's missing.
Okay. Now, back in when you did your original timeline some minutes ago, you did say that eventually they went to his room and they found his wallet there. They found this birthday present. I guess there was also some cake from the celebration of his birthday. But I think what caught my ear maybe the most is that Chuck had this reputation of being messy, but the room seemed to be somewhat neat. Is that actually how the way you remember it? Is what is in the notes? What does it say? What was the condition of his room when it was finally realized that he was missing?
Well, believe it or not, they took photographs.
Fantastic.
They responded of his. So thank God we
yes.
have that, and we know the exact condition of his room.
Fantastic.
And it was written in the initial report. So in general, his room was messy. It was in disarray. Not like the disarray of there was a struggle. It's just
right.
Piles of clothing, garbage, stuff piled up on the table. The bed didn't have any sheets or bedclothes that we could see on it. That's the only thing, me personally, that's the only thing I thought was very odd, but that might have been normal for him. We don't know, because I don't think anyone ever asked that question to anybody. Clothing was kind of shoved in the closet. He did hang some of his clothes. There's a bunch of empty 2-liter bottles. The fridge was empty. Medications on tables, in the bottles, things like that. On the bed itself was the bag of clothes of the gifts, and a picture of, I think, the niece, and the cake. So it wasn't even put into the fridge. On the table there was just the schedule of dinners, the meals, some doctor correspondence, his keys and his wallet, a picture of his son in the military, things like that. But just clothes thrown everywhere, and then a note that the sister left that says, Chuck called me, love your favorite sister, things like that. So, and then the phone that they took a picture of the phone. It was one of those cordless ones that had the answer machine built in.
Yes.
It shows 47 messages.
Wow.
And I do believe they listened to the messages, but I don't think they were documented of what each one was. It goes over it in the report in general. I don't think the phone numbers were ever written down, and we never took that phone into evidence or property because they were afraid it would delete all the messages if it was unplugged. So it was one of them old phones from that era.
Yes.
So bathroom was a mess, not clean at all.
Okay.
That kind of thing. So it was not neat at all.
Okay.
And that's what we talked about with the staff trying to get him help for cleaning, the residence.
Right.
That's why. Very unclean, uncleanly.
Okay. So it appears that he did get dropped off. He had these items in his hands, and he went into his room, and then sometime after that, he left, seemingly. At the time, let's just now go back to the time, of course, well before you were involved. What is your understanding of where the investigation went from there at the time?
After the initial report was taken, I believe that either that night or that day, another officer I believe they searched the property of Sem along. So Sem, where it's situated, it's right next to the Little Miami River.
Right.
But the front part of the property is a very high slope that goes down to the river. It's like at least, I would say, around 80 feet high. If you went over it, it's not like you can walk down it. You're going to fall down it.
Okay.
You're not going to catch yourself. And I don't know if there was gates or fencing along that property back then. And then if you keep going, I can't think of the exact directions. I think it's east-west there, west-east. So if you keep going east down the river line, there's another property next to Sem. It's called the Jesuit Center. And then down further is the Terrace Park Country Club, which is a golf course. So right around the Jesuit Center and the golf course, there's some access to the river. So one has steps down, and down by the golf course, there's an actual walk down. So that's kind of level. So those, I believe they searched the Jesuit Center property. They searched the Sem Villa property that night or the next day, and then parts of the golf course for Chuck. And the front of the property's roadway, and then it goes into another wooded area. So those were the initial searches. And at the time, so on Thursday, there was snow on the ground, a couple inches of snow, and the officer noted that there wasn't any footprints in the snow along the shoreline, like the river area. There was some down by the golf course, but it didn't seem like they went down to the river. But that snow on the day, so between Saturday and February 2nd, he did have mail on February 2nd, but no mail before that. So somewhere between Saturday and February 2nd, I would say, is a better estimate of when he actually went missing, because it does seem like he always got his mail. I can't say that for sure, but during those dates, there was snow on the ground and ice on the ground in that area. So, we talked about the different possibilities if he did go out on his own.
Right.
So initially there was some searching by the police officers, and I think a couple days later they searched the buildings. So that's common practice too. You would actually search the actual buildings for the missing person where they actually live. So any common areas, any places you could have got access to as a resident that they may not supposed to have been. They checked that with staff. Those were the initial responses to when he went missing. And I think we did bring out a thermal. So we had these handheld thermal imagers, and I believe an officer a couple days later searched along the river. I don't know how he searched, where he was at specifically, but it's in the notes that they did a thermal image along the river, which after a few days, there possibly would still be a heat signature different than the ground, where you might have been able to see if he was there. So that wasn't seen.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the initial response.
Sounds pretty complete to me. What your impression is? They did pretty much. I mean, of course, he's missing. As you've already stated earlier, he did have talk about maybe going for a swim in the river. It makes all the sense in the world to search that area. But it seems to me that they did as much as they could at the time. What is your impression?
From what I've seen, I mean, it would be common for, the police response that they did at the time. Now, I did look back later, and I've talked to one of the initial responding officers who still works here. Mm-hmm. And I had a map drawn up, and I said, can you show me on this map exactly where you went? So I would know. And I did find there's one or two areas that weren't covered back then that I'm still interested in checking. And the reason being was I called the NOAA, the weather, National Oceanic, whatever, I don't know.
Right, yeah, the place that predicts hurricanes and things like that, yes.
Yeah, and they actually have a website that they let me use to look up at the data on the river and the weather conditions back in 2009 during this time period around the time of the disappearance. So I was able to see snowfall, temperatures, what they called snowpack. So, like, believe it or not, in these 4 short days, one day it was down below zero, and another day it was 58 degrees.
Wow, what a range.
Yeah, and then there was like 7 or 8 inches of snow on one of the days, and then the melting, so the river went from, and it normally is about 5 or 6 feet in the Milford area. There's actually a river gauge, but it's upriver more towards the bridge instead of downriver where Stem is. It averages 5 or 6 feet during most of the year. That's its normal, and I can't remember the cubic feet per second of the current, but during this time period and a week later, it was at about 10 to 11 feet flood level, and the cubic feet per second was very, very fast. And then just south of the golf course, or whatever direction we're going to use, I don't know the exact directions, there's actually a east fork of the Little Miami that comes into Little Miami and feeds it there at a 90-degree bend. So at that time, that would have been flooding too, hitting the flood waters of the Little Miami going into a 90-degree bend. So it would have added to the cubic feet per second and at that bend. And looking at, if the possibility Chuck did go into the river, the various conditions of the temperature of the water and what effects it would have on a body, on a person that drowned. They initially sink, then after several, depending on the conditions, they would float. And based on flooding, there is an island in that 90-degree bend, and there's always the possibility that he could have got caught up in debris on that island.
Mm-hmm.
So there was later searches done in the river area, because a lot of the investigation led to the possibility that he did go to the river.
Sure.
And commit.
Sure.
But that's not everywhere investigation led. So the initial responses were focused on the grounds and the river, which is normal police response.
Now, you did say, though, being that there was snow on the ground, it didn't seem that there were any footprints by anybody, Chuck or not, going down to the river. Do you think that is something that's true, or they just didn't notice them, or is it conceivable that Chuck or somebody could get down to the river without leaving footprints? Once again, I've not been to the area. You have been to the area. What is your opinion on that?
Well, let me look at the weather data really quick.
Okay.
So, like I said, my estimate of when he disappeared would have been anywhere from Saturday up until February 2nd. So, Sunday would have been February 1st. Monday would have been the first day mail would have came. So, it's anywhere from Saturday to Sunday, or Monday morning. And on those particular days, let me look here just to make sure. So on that night that he disappeared, or was last seen, there was 5.5 inches of snowpack in this area. The temperature was 1 degree, and so that would have been ice, snow and ice. The next day jumps to 39 degrees with a snowpack of 5 inches, so there's starting to be some melt.
Okay.
Then we're looking on February 2nd, the snow's down to 3 inches, 34 degrees, but a high of 49 that day, so more melt, which then led to the flooding of the river. So it was jumping up from February 1st and got up to, so around February 5th through the 9th, it was at like 6,000 cubic feet per second and 11 feet high.
Wow.
So at that time, there was snow on the ground. So if there had been snow prints, there could have been melting, and they wouldn't have been there. But the officer did document fairly, very, very descriptive of what she did and what she saw. That part of the report was excellent.
All right.
I'm very happy to have that.
Yeah.
So if she said there wasn't any snow prints,
right,
we can rely on that.
But I guess what we're saying here is, being that it did take so long for Chuck to be discovered to be missing, whether we want to put that at 3 days, 5 days, that a lot of the snow had melted, so it's at least conceivable there were footprints. And then even though there might have been snow eventually still there when he was discovered to be missing, it's still possible that those footprints could have melted away.
Yeah, or been covered by new snow, because the date that she actually did, the report was February 5th. So on February 4th and 5th, there was snow of 9 inches, so it had snowed somewhere in between. So if he had already gone down to the river, the snow prints would have already been covered.
Right. Okay. All right. So.
All
right. So what we're saying here is, footprints, it may just be in general at first glance, well, no footprints. Well, I guess he didn't go to the river, but there's a lot of extenuating circumstances in there, right? a lot of things that make that a lot more complicated topic than just at first glance.
Yeah, if we had been called literally on Monday, any snow evidence would have been, I would say, more reliable.
Right.
And we probably would have been able to tell it was him going down to the river,
right,
if there were snow, because there was only 2 or 3 places he could have even accessed it.
Right.
And I can't remember his shoe size. I think it was fairly common shoe size, but if it came from the general direction we were looking and it was the only ones in the area, it would have increased the likelihood it was him.
Yeah. Now,
we don't have that.
Being that you are from the area, I realize you did not work at this police department until the position that you have now. But what is your understanding, the general understanding over history of that river, people falling into it for whatever, maybe suicide attempts or just accidents, of people being found in that river? Would you say that it has a history of when people go into the river that they are normally found? Have you looked into that, the history of people going into the river being found or not?
I know of a couple cases in the last few years. There was a case in Morrow, which is upriver, more towards like the Caesar Creek area, north of Ohio, on the Little Miami, during flood conditions similar to this, where an individual was attempting to escape from police custody, and he jumped into the river.
Wow.
And I can't remember how long later he was found, but he was found down in Loveland area, which is probably about 13 miles from where he jumped in. And there are some significant bends in the river along that route. But he also was not the size of Chuck. He was a thin and young, younger, thinner individual. But similar, would have probably had a coat on and clothing at the time. So he was found, I don't know how long it was, but he was found later in the Loveland area. So that's about 13 miles downriver.
Wow.
There has been a few drownings near Milford. We call it, I think it's like the Camp Dennison area of the Little Miami. And they have been located usually within a day or two later, and those were located fairly close to where they had drowned. I would say within 2 or 3 miles. Those are the ones I know of along the Little Miami.
All right, so once again, I realize just off the top of your head, we don't know of any situations where somebody for sure went into the river and wasn't found.
I don't know of any. Well, there is one nearby here. I just remembered, but they don't know for well, you're right. They don't know for sure, but there is another case within like 5 miles of here. Another agency has where they believe he went into the river, but he has never been found either.
All right.
So can't say for sure he went in.
All right, so that's just a missing persons case like Chuck's then.
Yeah, not similar in the circumstances, but I believe he went into the river possibly, and he's never been found.
Okay. So just maybe to conclude this, I think we've gotten a really good idea that over the years searches have been done. Obviously, a river theory has been taken very, very seriously. But how far downriver have searches gone over the years?
Well, we didn't actually get to the searching of the river area, it looks like, until about 2012 and 2013, other than the initial searches. I don't know why, and I haven't been able to find it in the reports. So there may have been other searches that I don't know of. I know the family supposedly did some searches, but they didn't coordinate with us or give us any information on that. So there may have been some family searches. But in 2012, EquiSearch Midwest did conduct a search of the Valley View area, which was across the street. It's a wooded area with no results. And then it looks like in 2013, a local canine search group and EquiSearch conducted the river area searches. I think they recovered Valley View. They did some of the river area. And there's an island just downriver in that 90-degree bend that they searched. And from that search, nothing was located. But on the island, they had human remains detection dogs. Some people call them cadaver dogs. And a dog, when it is looking for human remains, I guess, it can show interest. It can show interest in a certain area, but they have a trained final response. I think they call it a TFR. I don't know if that's the proper term. So on that island, one of the dogs showed interest in an area of river debris, but did not give the trained final response. I think there was 2 areas of interest, and there were 2 different dogs on that island, but it was all in the same general location of where some river debris was located, and that island was searched. But so that was around 2013. So that is as far downstream on the island that I have found. Okay. And it wasn't all the shorelines, and it wasn't all the floodplain areas in that area either. So, those are still some areas to be focused on. And then there was some other searches conducted that weren't river related. Right. So, and that had to do with property associated with Chuck and family members. Okay. Those were also along the way.
Now, did you say that in one of these other incidents where somebody went into the river that somebody was found 13 miles downriver?
Yes, that was the one in Morrow. Around like I think it was the winter time, and the river was at flooding levels. So if you could see a map of Morrow at the Little Miami River and the map of Loveland, downtown Loveland, there are 2 or 3 90-degree turns in that area, and there may be some islands along that way. But I think the person was found in debris around the park area in Loveland at that time. So they were.
But I guess what I'm asking is, but the person was found, of course, deceased, 13 miles downriver from where this person went into the river? Yes. So I have to ask, for Chuck's, once again, as best as you can tell, and I realize you've only become responsible for this in the last couple of years, have any searches gone 13 miles downriver to search for Chuck?
No.
Okay.
Not as of yet.
Okay.
That's my plan if we don't get any other information or pointed in another direction. I try to I'm going to try to continue moving downriver at most likely points of contact. And I will tell you this, that island, we just did another. So because of that interest back then, for some reason it didn't sit right with me, and I'm like, man, I don't know this. And there's some factors with human remains detection that would indicate, an interest. And I've talked to an FBI evidence team member about that too, and they say there's a lot of things in rivers that can cause that. Sewage into the river, different things can accumulate in debris piles. But about 2 weeks ago, I just wanted to search that island with a different group of human remains detection dogs, and I didn't tell them any areas. I didn't give any information other than I wanted the island to search, and during that search, the dog showed interest in a certain area and also did a trained final response. And this was within 50 feet to 100 feet of where those other two dogs showed interest. So we are going to, now granted, we don't have to be as legal sensitive on doing everything like with a search warrant, or certain specific procedures have to be met because it's most likely not a homicide. But we are going to take another set of dogs in a week or two down there again and see if we have a similar response in that area. But we've already decided maybe we shouldn't put this out. So let's be sensitive.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what
Okay.
this.
All right. Well,
I'm saying,
I think we've done enough. I think we got a really good idea about the river stuff. Obviously, the river has been a focus. There have been searches there. There certainly could be more searches done there, but it certainly has not been ignored. And it certainly sounds like the powers that be, local authorities, have done everything that they could to search it so far.
Yeah, we're going to continue floodplain areas and moving downriver as long as this case continues to be cold.
Right.
I don't have a super problem with mentioning the island thing. It's just, we haven't got it. We are going to search it.
Yeah.
We are going to move debris. We are going to excavate. We already just made that decision, and we're going to try to do it before winter and the freezing cold and the water, because you have to take a boat to get there.
Yeah.
But we are planning on doing that. I just don't want a bunch of public people trying to go over there and
Yes.
messing around before.
And I don't want people doing that either. So yes. Okay. Gotcha.
But we do plan on continuing moving downriver, because there's a lot of areas that during that flood, if he was floating and the water went down, he could have got trapped, and then when it re-flooded, it may have not moved him. And all these years later, because a lot of these are wooded areas that are not super heavily populated, they're not like parks or things like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of initial mileage around this area south, where he could have been deposited, and there may be remains if he went in the river. So we do plan on moving downriver, but if you look at the map, if he made it 13 miles, he's in the Ohio River, and there would never be any hope for recovery at that point.
Right. Well, let's turn the attention maybe the other way. What about land searches? I've looked at the map. I've never been to Milford, but I've looked at the maps. There are seemingly some forested areas, wooded areas, maybe I would say just generally to the east of that location. Those areas have been searched as well.
Yes, those were foot searches with EquiSearch back in 2013. They call it Valley View. It's across the street. That's Valley View. So that area was searched pretty extensively with no results.
Okay.
Nothing was found.
Okay.
Other land searches were properties related to Chuck and family that the investigation we couldn't overlook. We couldn't not do it, is what I'm saying.
No, I got you. I guess what we're also saying here is, being that that there were searches of, I just have to ask, being that you brought it up, I have to ask, there were searches of property connected to Chuck and his family?
Yes.
Okay.
So, like we talked about the three scenarios, accidental.
Right.
Let's say Chuck left and was walking down the road near Sim, got hit by a car, knocked over into the wood line. That's why we search Valley View.
Right.
Because there are some steep slopes along the roadway. That's the case. River, if it was suicide, so that's why we're searching the river area.
Right.
If there was any type of foul play, or even if it was accidental, but ends up being foul play, from the main part of our case here, going back on victimology, is the only people that were really involved in his life were family members.
Right.
There was one other individual that we still haven't located, but I've kind of put him lower on the level of the list to invest. We'll get a hold of him eventually, just to fill that hole. But this individual was in the car during the auto accident where Chuck's car was disabled, and the lady that was the bus driver told me in my interview with her recently, she said Chuck did not have any more association with that individual after that car wreck because he blamed him for the wreck.
Oh.
So that individual that came up in the investigation, that was around 2007. So that's 2 years before any of the disappearance. So that's why I kind of moved him lower on the level to look into. But as far as this, the other people in his life were family members. Right. So if you can't find Chuck at the river, you have to start moving your investigation towards the people in his life. Unfortunately, but that is a part of the investigation that you have to cover.
Right.
So, you have you have ex-wife, you have her boyfriend who's now her husband, and you have his sister and her husband, and then you have the two, his brother and the sister-in-law that dropped him off. So those are the only people that we know of that would have been involved with his life at the time.
Right. Not that many people.
No, not a lot at all, but they're still there.
Yeah.
So
I have to ask, would you say once again, I realize a lot of this was done before you got involved. Would you say, in general, that Chuck's family has been cooperative?
Well, in general, they have been over the years. The sister was very heavily involved with the case in the beginning years, like almost to the point where I was reading the case files and I'm like, man, they kind of were letting her kind of direct us where we were going in the investigation. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was my impression. I may not be correct, but it seemed like, she was the first one to point out, Chuck's mental health issues and his suicidalness and, the possibility of him being in the river, which may have been just normal, things that she was trying to point out. But it seemed like it directed the investigation. And she had conducted searches that didn't coordinate with us. Those things, they just kind of make you think. And normal, the ex-wife and the husband, they did, drop the daughter off with Chuck,
Yeah.
So there was in the notes that I can see an amicable relationship with the ex. And just other than uncleanliness, she wouldn't let her daughter go over there if Chuck's apartment was unclean. And from what we can tell from interviews with the now husband, they were amicable together. I don't know if they were like friends or anything, but apparently Chuck had been to their house for different holidays. And so I would say that it was a tolerated relationship.
Okay.
He was so they've been cooperative. Those two in particular did do polygraphs and CVSA charts. So CVSA is voice stress analysis.
Right.
They both did them, and from from what was the questions were asked, they were truthful. So there doesn't seem to be anything that points to anything there. What we should have done, and it's common procedure, is usually the people that report the missing or the crime are the first ones that need to be cleared. And we should have, looking back, probably should have done a polygraphs and CBSAs to clear them immediately, the sister and her husband. Unfortunately, we did not do that. And in 2019, an investigator did reach out and was trying to schedule them for, I think, a voice stress analysis, in which they refused. They didn't want to do it. And then that was the last time that the sister, that I can tell from the case files, that we ever had any contact with the sister. And I was told she used to call every year for updates and to thank, the officers that were investigating. So, I know things change in people's lives. I'm not saying,
could be health issues, could be a lot of different things. Yeah.
But, it makes me look at it like, let's clear you now and get it over with. I just, that way we're not wasting investigative resources looking into you. I would rather be looking into other things if we could say, for sure, hey, based on this, we can look elsewhere.
I guess where I'm going with this, in bringing up, of course, it makes all sense to me. You have to look at all of these different angles and look at the last people. We know how many times when people go missing that, not all the time, but many times, if we're to believe, or if there are things that make us believe that there could have been foul play, obviously you have to take a look at the people who last spoke to or saw the missing person. Makes all the sense in the world, and it very well could be none of those people had anything to do with the disappearance, and of course that's quite common as well. But something that you did say earlier, though, did catch my ear, maybe just because I've been doing this for 9 years, is that you got the, what Chuck was last wearing, and I think that you said it came from the 6-year-old niece. It didn't come from his brother or the brother's wife. It actually came from the 6-year-old niece. That does seem a little odd to me. Is that what you meant to say? Is that true?
Well, so I hate to say it, but when I'm looking through the notes today, I'm like, wow, the only person that gave us the description was the 6-year-old. It wasn't the brother and the sister-in-law. And when reading the notes on them, it says they didn't remember what he was wearing, but that she was the one that offered it, and she specifically remembered the shoes because she remembered talking to Chuck about that she couldn't tie her shoes either. Mm-hmm. She had said that at the course of the dinner, so she did remember the black Velcro strap shoes. So I would say, out of all the clothing description, the black Velcro strap shoes are probably the most accurate to rely on.
Yeah.
But other than that, we can't say a 6-year-old's going to accurately remember clothing, but they might. But that's the last clothing description that we know of that Chuck would have possibly been wearing.
All right, so we have 2 adults and a 6-year-old, and it's the 6-year-old who offers up the clothing description, not the 2 adults.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And I will say this. Based on the staff's description of what he normally wears, the sweatpants do also fit.
Yeah.
But anything else,
I agree with you.
We don't really.
It does. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Let's move on to this. Any witnesses, of course, I have to ask this. It's probably fairly clear to everybody listening right now, but I have to ask anyway. Any witnesses that night? Anybody see Chuck actually come back to his place? And being that I've not been there, but you have been there, is it conceivable that Chuck could have gotten dropped off, gone to his room or apartment or whatever they call it, dropped all that stuff off, and left without anybody seeing him? Does that sound reasonable, the way you understand it? If you've been there, what do you think?
Yeah, if you look at the building, obviously it's a 4-sided building, but where Chuck lived in the basement, it kind of opened. There were doors that entered into like a small courtyard by a parking lot. Now, I believe the area was lit, but he could have went in and out that door, and unless someone was looking out their window, no one would have noticed Chuck was there, because it's a back parking lot. Most people use the front area, the main doors, to go in and out when they drop people off. But since Chuck lived back on the side area, so it's very possible no one would have seen him coming or going from the apartment based on where he usually entered and exited.
Mm-hmm. All right, and we also have to state, even, this was something that did surprise me, is that even in 2009, this facility did not have an extensive camera, video, security network, anything like that, right? So there's not even any chance of having any video from back then.
No, nothing like that. I don't know what it is now, but definitely not
Right.
then.
Right. That's surprising.
I don't know if you into it, but there was someone during the course of the investigation that we noted as a possible witness.
Mm-hmm.
She lived upstairs in that courtyard, and from talking with staff, looking in the notes of the interviews with her and talking to staff, they said that she would have been a fairly reliable witness, that she wasn't like one that made up stories or things like that, and had all of her faculties about her, so she could be considered reliable.
Mm-hmm.
And she was interviewed within several weeks of when Chuck disappeared initially.
Yeah.
And at the time, she said that she saw that night, so this would have been after Chuck had been dropped off, that night of Saturday. And she said specifically, and I'll get to that here in a second, that she saw Chuck get picked up by a dark-colored SUV-type vehicle, and that she saw two females get out of the car. One had a little dog, and one was a little bit heavier set, and then Chuck got into the back seat, and they drove off. And she said that was around 10:30 that night. So, based on the description, from what we could tell with the SUV and the two females, they seem to match the ex-wife and the daughter, because they did have an SUV. But the reliability of the definite date, that's the only thing that would be in question. The witness at the time said that she wrote it specifically on her calendar the day when she learned that Chuck was missing.
Yeah.
So that would have been a couple of days later, but it could have very easily been a few days before or a few days after, and she just marked it on that date on her calendar. So don't know, but somewhere in that time period, someone matching that description picked Chuck up at 10:30 at night. We don't know if it was that night. So that's why some of the investigation would lead that direction of, okay, did they pick that night, and what happened if it was that night.
All right, so once again, and you should know, Jeff, having done this for 9 years, I know how eyewitnesses can be. It's just all over the place, and especially if we're talking weeks later, it could be total truth, but good luck trying to prove that. It could be a different day. It could have, she thought it was Chuck. It could have been somebody different. All sorts of different possibilities here. And I don't want the audience to automatically jump to conclusions just because somebody said something like that. It very well may be this person is, in her mind, telling the truth, but she could be totally, totally off. I just want to make sure the listeners understand that. But I do have to ask, was the ex-wife ever asked about this? Do you know, did she ever go there and pick Chuck up at 10:30 at night? That seems kind of late to me. Did that ever happen? Did she ever admit to doing anything like that, but on a totally different day?
Well, that's so probably why they were eventually polygraphed or voice stress analysis based on that, pointing in their general direction to clear them. But she, like we know, Amy is the daughter, was brought over occasionally and dropped off at night.
Yep.
Or for trips, but so we knew that, and it very well could have been one of those nights, which the closest time that we could tell maybe a week prior to that, where she was either picked up or visiting. It doesn't seem to be anything at the time, but I remember the husband, the now husband of the ex-wife, when he was asked if he was there that night, he goes, "I don't even remember if I was there or not." But like I said, they were polygraphed, and I'm sure those questions were asked. At least normally there's a general question of, were you involved with the disappearance of Chuck? And if that was one of the questions and it was indicated truthful, it was noted in the report, and that is the case.
Okay.
With that, so it did lead the investigation down that road. We were able to locate the vehicle years later with another owner, and he consented to search of that vehicle, and we did do testing for DNA and fluids in the back area. There was some stains, and they were sent to the lab. There was no signs of anything that was Chuck in that car. So, it clears that vehicle, and it basically, at least from this witness statement, probably clears them from anything that we would look into from that aspect of the investigation.
Right. But on that note, and this is not something that I think I found out from you, but from one of the other people that I've spoken to that will remain unnamed, is that there was something curious that happened like a week after Chuck went missing. A story that is told by, I think it wasn't just one person who witnessed this, but several, all of them, I would say probably believable because they had nothing to do with Chuck. Something about stuff being dumped in a trash bin at the facility. Can you talk about that, Jeff?
Okay, so it looks like on March 5th, so almost a month exactly when he was reported missing, employees of Sem Villa called us, I think it was in the morning, that they had seen two males on Sem Villa property dumping trash into their recycle dumpster. Says that they contacted their maintenance worker to see if they could look at the trash and see what might be in it. And the maintenance worker initially found some prescription bottles and items with Chuck's daughter's name on them, and then some mail of the ex-wife with her address in that. Let's see, it was around 9 in the morning. So that time of year may still be dark. Might have been just the cusp of daylight. They saw the two males in there. They described them. It was a red pickup truck with fading paint and ladder racks and bars. And they didn't get the plate, but they noticed like the front plate was missing or hanging off of the grill. So when they called us, that was looked into. And so that truck was found, I guess. Let's see. It ended up, we found out that the truck belonged to the ex-wife's boyfriend, which is now her husband, but he had sold it to the brother-in-law, which would have been Julie's husband. But he said, now that's the ex-wife's husband now, he said it was him that morning dumping the garbage because he usually takes his garbage to a friend that works at Rumpke, which is a local trash dump in the Cincinnati area. They may be more, all over, but which he normally takes his trash to the friend at Rumpke to have it disposed. So I guess they didn't, I don't know if it was ever looked into, but they may or may not have had trash collected at their property. So he said since he was on the way, and they just dumped it there. His excuse was they were searching for Chuck, him and initially he said a friend and dogs were searching for Chuck at the property. Later interviews with him, was his nephew, Steve, and him, and no mention of dogs searching at the property at that time of morning. But then he also mentioned that the truck was sold to Julie's husband, and that immediately thereafter it was driven to Georgia and never seen again. And he made that statement, like, you know, to me it was an odd statement to make. So we've never found out, like, we've never followed up. That was another whole, like, who is this friend or who was this nephew, to make sure that they were actually there with him and what they actually were doing. It's very, to me, it's just very odd behavior to be on that property a month later dumping trash at a garbage bin, and then we don't know for sure who was actually with him, and we've never verified that story. But we started looking into the name Stephen as a possible relative, and then that led us to finding out that there was a family member of that name, and he had been recently booked for a homicide.
Wow.
We're not, well, but here's what we found out was, so you're thinking we have a good lead here.
Well, I don't know, but what that certainly is something that makes me say, wow.
Yeah, bells and whistles are going off. But we found out that if that was the person, in early January of 2009, he was already in jail and transported to a prison for another crime, and was not out of that prison at the time that this would have occurred.
Wow.
So it wasn't him. So now we need to know who is this other Stephen guy, or who is this friend. So there's a big hole there. And to me, you look back and I'm like, well, that is very strange behavior. But like I said, that he was polygraphed and voice stressed on about it and any involvement. And like I said, based on the questions that were asked him on these polygraphs and CVSAs, he was indicated as being truthful. Now, granted, I don't know the exact questions and things like that, but there may be some different questions that need to be asked in the future.
I guess, was he specifically asked about why this stuff got dumped there? Has this person actually admitted dumping stuff there? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, he admitted to being there and dumping the items, and what he said was he normally takes them to the Rumpke friend, but since he was there along the way going there, he stopped there to apparently do a search for Chuck, and then just dumped them in their trash can while he was there. That was the reason he gave for that.
Okay. And he was using somebody else's truck, though.
Well, the truck was originally his, but apparently at the time of this date, specifically, he had already sold it to the brother. Well, it would have been, I don't know if it would have been his brother-in-law yet, but he had sold it to Julie's husband. At that point, titled to Julie's husband. And then, so I don't know why they were sharing the truck or anything. Those questions were never asked. Those are things we still need to try to find out eventually, if we still get cooperation down the road.
Right. I guess what I'm also asking then, so the witnesses who I think are 100% believable, and of course this person has admitted dumping stuff there, he just won't tell you who the other person is? I mean, like you said, you thought it was some other person, and should he not be able to say, yeah, John Smith was with me, and should it not be that simple, Jeff?
It should have been. I think that was. I'll say that's our fault.
Okay.
I don't think the specific question was ever asked. Like, okay, you were just dumping garbage, and it was kind of moved on, and then we look back years later, like, oh, we probably need to look into this a little further too. Under a different scenario, if Chuck wasn't in the river.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is, this guy And please remind everybody who it was that was seen dumping the stuff. Please remind everybody who that was.
It would be the ex-wife's husband now, but at the time he was her boyfriend.
Okay. And we should be clear, this is not the guy that would have been with Chuck for his birthday, for the birthday celebration. That was actually Chuck's brother who was there for that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But I guess what we're saying
person.
is that, all right, so you track him down. They tracked him down. He said, oh, yeah, I was just dumping stuff there. Here's why. Here's why this is. But he never explicitly explains, well, yeah, John Smith was with me. And that is still a question mark all these years later.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. And when was the last time have you had made an attempt to talk to the ex-wife and her husband and everything these days?
I haven't done any of that part yet with family other than the son, because I know definitely, obviously he definitely wasn't involved with anything.
Yes.
I didn't really want to start digging into that because I like to do more background in parts and have something to actually go back to someone with all these years, because you're opening new old wounds maybe. You don't want to start out with like, hey, you don't want them to think, hey, we're suspicious of you all these years later, but looking back, I mean, it's at some point we're going to have to talk to them again about some of these things. I just haven't gotten to that point yet. And I haven't really thought it necessary based on so far where I've been pointed in this investigation.
Right. All right, so we have this dumping that happened a week later. The person who did it does not deny doing it. It's just a little hard to understand the vehicle that he was using, and why it's still a little mystery who the other guy was. But once again, this is not the guy who was with Chuck that night. There's no proof that this. Of course, we have to remember this is Chuck's ex-wife's boyfriend. How much interaction did they have? It seems a little convoluted to me to think there's something here. But if people are going to do things like this, I guess they have to be questioned, and I can't blame the police back then or now with you wanting to perfectly understand this. It makes all the sense in the world to me. Something that we've also we mentioned it early on, but we haven't discussed it since then, is Chuck's physical ability. He was 5'8", I'm 5'9", I'm about 180 pounds. Chuck was 5'8", 300 pounds. Let's say, what was his actual physical ability as far as walking and everything? Let's say he didn't go into the river. Any idea of how far he could have walked, how physically able he could have walked that night? Let's just say he was planning to walk down to the corner to get a candy bar, and could he do that? What's your understanding?
Well, number one, there's nowhere really close for that kind of scenario where he would be walking down to the corner store. But very overweight, obviously 300 pounds, 5'8".
Yeah.
He did have high blood pressure, used a CPAP at night, so obviously some cardiovascular issues.
Right.
But from what I've been told, and there's mixed statements over the years with different people, but the bus driver says he was very ambulatory and able to walk and mobile for not exactly long distances, but she said he regularly walked the Stem Villa property to different areas. But other people have said that he would only travel, short distances because of back pain. So he would have to move slowly, that they say. But he still was able to move to where he wanted to go. But as far as issues with, snow and ice and distance at those particular points when he disappeared, those are some obstacles we would need to consider. But other than that, somewhere in the initial reports, when I was reading the initial NAMUS information that that we had published from years ago, it said he'd only walk sideways, and I have not found that anywhere in any of the reports. So I have no clue where that information came from, and I've since had them update some of the things on that, because if you even look at that or the Charley Project stuff for this case, there's very little information out there because there really isn't much that we had to give them.
Right.
This is as most detailed as we've ever gone into, and at this point we're like, we have nothing. We have everything to gain by putting all of this information out now.
Right. I guess what I'm asking, let's just say, okay, maybe the convenience store was a mile away or 2 miles away or something. Is it conceivable that Chuck could have walked there, given his ability, and maybe had a heart attack and just went into a ditch or into the woods somewhere, and just, once again, nothing against all the work you've done and all the searches and everything, but just hasn't been found? Is it possible that he could walk 2 miles on a January night in Ohio?
I would not say miles. I would say more in the terms of maybe football fields. Let's put it in that terms. And this is my opinion, just based on what I've read. I would say at the very most a football field or football field and a half distance. So, maybe 300 to 400 feet at a time. But I would say with ice and snow and with his issues, I would definitely think he would have been falling down some point.
Right. Okay.
If he had walked anywhere that night.
Okay. All right, and of course we've already, if people are wondering, well, it's 2009, but I think this was already mentioned earlier. Chuck did not have a cell phone. All he had was the phone that was in his room at the facility. He did not have a cell phone.
Not that we've ever uncovered from any of the investigation, because of his income and the assistance he was. And the only thing that I do know is that he had a lower rate on his phone, and it was a landline in his room.
Okay. All right, so no help there. Of course, as you would guess, Jeff, most of, we get to about 2004, 2005, cell phones really start to enter the conversations that I have with people for disappearances, like the last 20 years. Anything before that, usually not. There seems to really be a very distinct line there. But 2009, for Chuck's, we have no cell phone information at all. Now, something that came up once again from somebody that will not be mentioned in this interview said that at some point a family member actually showed up at the facility doing some videoing and saying that, well, this is the way that Chuck went down to the river or something along those lines. Is this true? Was this person asked about it at the time? Was this followed up on? What can you say about it?
Well, the staff had reported to us that, and this was, I guess, in a re-interview of the staff in around 2012, that somewhere around the time of the disappearance, and I don't have the exact date, but that the sister was seen, Chuck's sister was seen on the property videotaping, and when she was confronted by staff of what she was doing there, she told them that she was recording the area that she believed that Chuck might have went down to the river, and that she was doing that for, in the report it says her son, but I believe that was just probably a misstatement. It was probably for Chuck's son. So that staff, I don't have any reason to say that that's not a true thing that we don't believe happened, but I cannot find, just looking through the initial supplementals, where we ever asked the sister specifically about her videotaping on the property. But there is a couple phone interviews that I'd have to re-listen to see if that was ever mentioned. At this point right now, from memory and looking at reports, I don't see where we've ever talked to her specifically about what she was doing and why.
Okay.
So I can't verify it for sure, but no reason not to believe what staff said either.
Okay. And to put this in context, we cannot deny that it's accepted by everyone that Chuck had in the past talked about having suicidal ideas, and one of those ideas was going to swim, going down to the river and going for a swim. So we just have to acknowledge that this isn't something that this person, just created out of nowhere. It very well could be this person who made this video did it for the reason, just jumping to conclusions and saying, well, Chuck talked about it, now he's missing. I guess he finally followed through with, what he had talked about before. It does seem somewhat morbid, I guess, and that's why I had to ask you about you, because it sounds so morbid. It's like, well, did that really happen? But it does seem, according to the police, that this is something that is accepted to be true, that this actually did happen. This videoing did happen.
Yeah, I would say, well, number one, you got to think about the time.
Yeah.
Back then, how many people had cameras? Phones nowadays is different, but number one, having a video camera, and then secondly, to be at the property, supposedly thinking that this was the route he might have taken to the river. That's a lot of just guessing. But Julie was the first one to mention that Chuck had suicidal thoughts and had mentioned drowning himself in the river too in the initial reports. So she had mentioned his mental health diagnosis as well in the initial contact the night of the missing reports. So, in that standpoint, you could look at it from it's possible someone would do that. It's just bizarre behavior. At least looking, from my standpoint, I don't think it's normal behavior. Maybe nowadays with a YouTuber going back to a site of a missing person and saying, well, this might be where he went in.
That happens, yes.
So, I don't know.
Right.
I would say the staff is reliable, and I'm sure probably asked about this in some of the interviews. I just would have to look through them and make sure. But I can't verify that we ever spoke to her actually about it.
Okay. Let's move on to this. So I think those are pretty much the specifics, the circumstances. We've gotten to know Chuck well. We've gotten to know the circumstances well. We know about the timeline. We know about the searches. We know about all these different, we might call them quirks, the dumping of the stuff into the trash bin a week later, this video, all of this. One of the big things that I run into, just to change this, put this back in a more general conversation, you see, maybe in the general public, how is it with all the technology these days, even in 2009 terms, how can people still go missing? I guess it's still possible, right? Jeff, and this is one of the ways, whatever happened with Chuck, this is one of the ways it can happen. Maybe it's still a lot easier than maybe the general public realizes. What do you think?
Well, lots of factors. Let's look at the river scenario. You have animals that do deflesh parts of bodies. If it's in the water too long, exposure, decomposition. Very easily someone that went into the river, if they were never found, bones could have been moved by animals. They never could be found. If he was deposited in mud or under debris piles, he may still be there after all these years, but if he got knocked off the side of a road, same thing. It's just dry land animals and things like that. Different things could move the person. You've seen all the forensic shows, and they give everybody thousands of ideas of how to get rid of people if they wanted to. Unfortunately, I think those shows help the criminals more than the police. But
I agree.
There's so many different ways, that someone could disappear. I don't think in this case. Well, he's already been declared dead dead by the courts
Yeah.
in 2015.
Right.
But at this point, I don't think Chuck's alive, living somewhere else with a different identity. We did have a tip years ago, and you get those goofy tips when you have a case put on the news every once in a while, and then it takes up tons of investigative resources to find out how, that was a tip that made no sense. So we followed up on one where someone presented that scenario on a tip, but it, of course, panned out to nothing, but took plenty of investigative time and resources. But I don't think that's Chuck, because there's no support. There's no friends. There's no money. There's no transportation. Chuck does not have a new identity somewhere else. I hate to say it, and I feel empathy for all those that knew him and loved him, but I do believe he's deceased. And I hope someday we find him.
Right. Yeah, I want to also ask you, being that you were a patrol officer for many years, of course, in a different jurisdiction, did you have a lot of experience, of course, calls for people who are going through mental health crises? I'm guessing you did, and does that kind of experience help you in trying to look at Chuck, who obviously had suffered from his own mental health issues? Whether those caused his disappearance or not, we don't know. But has that experience helped you in trying to analyze this case as well?
Well, definitely it was one of the scenarios that I wanted to investigate further. So one of the first things I did in this case was I looked up the address that he was living at STEM, and we have some of our old records management systems. We still keep them, and I was able to look up the address, and I found like 5 calls for service over the years to Chuck's residence for psychiatric issues, and unfortunately, the officers put about 1-sentence statements in there, and they didn't say what he said or why. There was nothing other than we responded for a squad run, and squad transported him to the hospital, or he was threatening to harm himself. It's just something like that. And I'm like, man, all these years later, it sure would have been nice for a couple statements that would have said exactly how he threatened to harm himself.
Right.
And when you take one for an involuntary hold, which in Ohio we're allowed to do if we determine that they are a threat of harm to themselves or others, or are generally not taking care of themselves, we have a state law that allows police specifically to take someone involuntarily for a hospital hold to be evaluated by a psychiatric doctor, and then the doctor can determine whether or not they can go back out on their own. So they're called a 72-hour hold, but in Ohio, no one ever stays 72 hours. It's usually less than 8 to 10 hours, and the doctor's kicking them back out on the street. But we know there's a mental health crisis in the United States, so I would say that's not just to our area, but it happens everywhere. They just don't have the facility to hold. So they hold people based on the levels of threat. So Chuck went at least 4 or 5 times, and like I said, I was able to access our records of the reports from those days years ago, so that was good to have. But then when I looked at the reports, there wasn't any information in them to lead me to specifics of what he said, so I attempted to get the fire department's records, and they had said, well, we destroyed them. It's been, over, whatever their retention is, so the physical records were destroyed. The only other options is to attempt, you have to get court orders or grand jury subpoenas for hospital and doctor records.
Yeah.
Which I did, and then I was able to find a couple that matched up to the dates of these runs, and then there were doctor notes talking about the specifics of any suicidal ideations, and in a few, not all of them, was where he mentioned taking and he always said, swim in the river. Not like I'm going to drown myself in the river, I'm going to take a swim in the river. And when asked to elaborate, he really didn't elaborate even to the doctors. but in their cases, they called that a suicidal ideation. So there was 2 or 3 mentions of that in those notes, but like I said, the last one I can find that's confirmed of that he said that was around 2007, so about 2 years prior to his disappearance. So there is a lot of things that point to the theory, the scenario of Chuck drowning himself in the river.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that I would say we're pointed in that direction about 60%. But there's a 40% of a mixture of possibility of accidental and possibility of someone being involved with his disappearance.
Something maybe that we've it's been obvious, but we've maybe kind of a little bit glossed over. Of course, we've talked about Chuck's size, and being that there's no proof of any particular theory, I think what we're also saying, Jeff, is that if somebody did something to him, it would probably take more than one person to get rid of him. Is that the conclusion that you've come to? Have you, what are your impressions about that?
Well, if we look at the scenarios about an accidental death or other than a car knocking him off the side of the road and not knowing, and him never being found, if someone hit him and did try to cover it up, it would have taken more than one person to load him up or move him to a site. With being 300 pounds, I don't know many people that can drag dead weight 300 pounds any distances or lift him up into a vehicle. If it was a foul play scenario, even if it was an accidental death in foul play, like an argument that, I accidentally killed him, or it was something deliberate, you still are going to have to get rid of him somehow, hide him, whether it's throwing him down a well or a cistern or burying him,
right?
Or even, the other possible scenarios. Someone else would have had to help or known about what was happening because of his size. And then even looking at the suicide scenario, I've talked to the director of EquiSearch Midwest. He's like, man, with his size, even if he made it to the river, he should have been found. Based on like what we already talked about with other people, no one's not been found that we know that went into that river.
Right.
So even him, with all his experience, he said Chuck should have been found if he was in that river. And I tend to agree with that, unless, like we've talked about before. So those 3 scenarios, at least 2 of them, someone else would have had to either known or helped with trying to hide his remains if they were involved.
I agree with you. It does bring up an additional question that I probably should have asked you when we were going through the river scenarios. I've seen this done before. I've heard about it being done before. I'm not sure how often it's done. I know that my impression, this is more done for things regarding like lake, or not lakes, but gulfs and seas and oceans when it comes to currents and everything. But would there be a way of using like a dummy, like a body of approximately 5'8", 300 pounds, to be thrown into the river, let's say, the next time the river is similar to what it was like when Chuck went missing, to find out what that body might do? Of course, it might be a mannequin or something like that, but I know this has been done before. I think they did this for the Atlanta child murders back in the early 80s, where they were trying to figure out where these children were being thrown into the river, and they did this by this method. Is this something that you would consider to do, to maybe see what an actual body does in the river, to see how far it does go? Just, do it like 5 different times and, see what the different results are. Is that something that you think would be constructive?
I do, and it actually has crossed my mind. It's just the logistics. So yeah. From what I've been told, pigs are the most similar in the type of skin and things like that, and organs.
Right.
And also that would most a pig. There are, I think, in general, the smallest weighs 300 pounds.
Yes, there's some
but
big pigs and hogs out there for sure. Yes, of course.
now, I don't know if someone wants to, sacrifice a pig or how much a pig would cost, but
Yeah.
it is something I've heard. But then, you have to look at the other standpoint of, the animal protective people or probably would not be happy with us, something like that. But I have thought about that, because if we put that into the river around the same, like you said, around the same temperatures, around the same depth and flow, around the area we possibly think he is, I would be very interested to see.
Yeah.
Now, the only difference would be is that particular time the river went up and then down for a few days and then back up, and we could never predict that.
No.
But I would be interested to
No.
so you could put even a device on it to track it, but I would be interested to see at least if there's an initial trapping of the carcass on that island, at least for the flooding,
Right.
if it just doesn't out into the debris, because from the way I look at the patterns of the way the river flows and then that East Fork, if they were both flooding, everything points to that island, and the debris of where the debris settles on that island. And I've looked at Google Earth maps where you can do time past aerial photos, and that island hasn't changed very much over the years. Now, the Little Miami is a very changing river because it's sand bottom and stuff, limestone type bottoms, mud, and lots of tree debris and stuff like that. So one year you could have a good fishing hole in one spot, and then the next year it's gone because the flooding totally changed the way of the river in certain areas. But that island in specific looks pretty much the same now as it did in 2009.
Right.
So that's why, and I told you, the dog indications and why I wanted to refocus on the island again. So I would love to do that. I don't know if there's someone out there that would like to donate a pig for that, and I'd have to convince the command staff here to do it. But in general, they've supported almost every idea I've come up with on trying to locate, Chuck, and I don't think they would be against anything like that. So
no,
think
it'd be good for me, Jeff, because you do not know how many times I've suggested to guests that they should do this. Of course, I've covered disappearances where we believe people went into the Mississippi River, the Delaware River, the Rio Grande. There was a guy who most likely went into the Atlantic Ocean. The Gulf of whatever you want to call it these days, America, Mexico, whatever it is these days. And I don't think any of my guests have ever taken me up on this. So I'm just going to keep throwing that idea out there until somebody does it. So I'm glad that I guess great minds think alike. You've already considered it.
Yeah, and I would do it if we're allowed to, and we can get a way to do it. I would do it. The other thing I thought about doing, the Little Miami is a very unique river, and it encompasses an area where there's a lot of local smaller agencies along the Little Miami. I have also thought about, and I just don't have the time, but having agencies look through or remembering historical incidences of people either drowning or going in the river, and where the location of that was and where they ended up, along with any, maybe weather data and river flow data at the time, and keeping like a database of that as a possible, resource in the future of any agencies that might have a drowning or a missing along the river, where places where you should immediately look based on the timeline, and then from there, if they're not located.
Right.
And that would not be hard to do. It just takes a lot of time and data, entry. But I don't know if there's even been that many over the years. But if we could even just go back 25 years, I think that would be a valuable resource.
I think you're right.
That's another thing I may be doing in the future. There's just so much other things that need to be done first.
Yeah. Just a little bit about the future. Of course, you're going to continue to work on Chuck's disappearance, and I'm guessing you're working maybe on some other things. But, how much from working on Chuck's disappearance, and of course I hope you solve it today, tomorrow at the latest, but if that doesn't happen, how much is it going to guide, the next investigation that you're asked to work on through the Milford Police Department? Do you think you've learned some new things in working on it for the last couple years that you will be able to apply elsewhere? What do you think?
Well, definitely, looking at this case as a cold case after the fact,
yeah,
I've definitely stressed to the officers now, and I say it, I've done it myself. When you respond on these missings or these types of cases, granted, a lot of them are cases or people you've been to before many, many times, but you never know when there's going to be the one that never came home years later, and you're going to be like, man, I wish I would have done that at the scene that day.
Sure.
I wish I would have gathered these records. I wish I would have interviewed these people, and I wish I would have taken these items into evidence just in case they didn't come back. So I have said that to the officers. Now, granted, they might look at me as the old guy and just blow off what I say. But, maybe they'll listen and take that into account.
Yeah.
And I believe that there is a lot of push towards. I hate to have it in legislation that you're required to do certain things as a police officer, because they push so much on responsibilities, a lot of social work type stuff that we really don't have any business. It shouldn't be part of our job, but it's everybody else not being able to do it. So throw it on the police officers. Yep. And but I do believe there should be some general protocols and guidelines, and in general there is, like, we have Amber Alerts now and Silver Alerts. The report, it's required to take a report within a certain amount of time and have it entered into the national system within, I believe, 24 hours. It may be less for juveniles, but there are some standards now that we have to do. But as far as the initial investigations, I think it's hard to get officers that are busy going from call to call to call to look at that particular call and take it a little bit more serious. And I understand that. And that's just the nature of reactive policing, which is unfortunately, with staffing levels all over the United States, reactive policing has overtaken proactive policing. And we need to change it back. But proactive policing would be more of a push for, hey, spend a little bit more time here, gather a little bit more things, take some photographs, get some statements, lock people into statements initially, because weeks and months later, if they were involved, they have had time to think about it and change their statements to cover up some things. So, that would be my advice and how I would treat things differently. Plus, we do have another cold case. It's not a missing. I'm interested in looking into in the future, but I have a whole bunch of investigative techniques I've learned now that I would definitely apply to that if I ever get a chance to work on that one. But it's nothing. It's not a missing. It's not that kind of a case. But everything, the basic techniques still apply.
Okay.
So I've learned a lot.
Yeah. Great.
Okay. And I've made a lot of contacts, with search teams, and I was already involved as a volunteer with one. I still am, and the canine handlers from all over. I've called the FBI, the different agencies that some of these properties are involved with. I've made a lot of networking, learned a lot, and these things all in the future may help me later when I need help from a certain specialized, person. I made these contacts now. I have friends. I have phone numbers. I know they're reliable. They know I'm reliable. So those are things that you just get with experience and time.
During, I have to ask, this is going to be very self-serving, but I'm going to ask anyway. During your time, of course, leading up to becoming a police officer, I think you said way back in 1994, and I think you said that your father was also a police officer. Over the years, did you ever get any training on investigating or, filling out reports more than just filling out the reports, but asking the right questions regarding disappearances at all?
I don't believe initially in the police academy in 1994. In fact, I specifically remember like the robbery response training we got.
Yeah.
Like was 70s, and it still said, if you're involved with a robbery, when you get on scene, make sure you call your location in on the vehicle radio because you will not have a radio with you when you leave the vehicle. So that's how old that training was back then.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And but I know now, like we do have to do continuing education. There's a requirement for certain hours now, and a lot of it's victim related, crisis intervention stuff. But I know there is more about like mostly child type abductions and missings. I'm treating those investigations, not really the adult parts. But there is training now. Initial response, those kind of things. Make sure you search the residence of the child, because a lot of times they're actually found in the residence, hiding in a closet or in an attic or something like that. So that should always be the very first place you search before you start calling in resources. So we have learned some things, and we're taught some things, and it's just whatever is in, I guess, the in thing in policing at the time is what is pushed on us for continuing education. Like the big thing now is mental health, addressing mental health and homelessness. So we learned a ton of crisis intervention techniques, active listening, calming type behaviors to de-escalate situations where use of force would be the least of your options, instead of more higher level choice right away. So they've emphasized that. Sometimes it's not always practical, but at least the information's out there. So whatever is like the big thing at the time, like sex trafficking, a couple years ago, that was the big push.
Right.
So we had all this training on that. And then when you actually got a case, it got blown off by the prosecutor's office or the federal government. They really weren't interested. It was just a way to spend some money. I hate to say that, but it's the truth.
Okay, I'm inclined to agree with you. So, but we'll just finish up with this, Jeff. Any final words before we complete this interview?
No. You look at like this case, and what really bothered me is, after all these years, I'm not saying that we as a police department didn't care, but I look at it because we do care. Obviously, we've done a ton of work on this. In fact, we were complimented on the work we have done. It's just, man, there's no one to speak up for Chuck. All these years, I had a friend of his that I contacted over the years, and he said the same thing. He's like, man, this really bothers me, because Chuck was a friend a long time ago, and no one knows what happened, so there's no one speaking up for Chuck. No one's looking. We are looking for him, but so when I thought about that, I'm like, that does bother me, that someone needs to be Chuck's advocate. We need to be continuing, even if it looks futile, because you never know. Someone may make a phone call, where relationships change, and say, hey, this is what happened, this is where he is, or you need to talk to this person. And that may give a break in the case, that we need. But that's where, unless we find him or someone tells us something, unfortunately, that's all we need that, or we will never find him unless we get lucky and find the remains. But like I said, unless we find him or someone tells us something, all we can do is continue what we can do to fill in the holes, and someday all those holes are going to be filled.
Right.
In this case.
Okay. Jeff, thank you for appearing on this episode of Unfound.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Chuck's case, and Chuck. We need to remember Chuck, and we hopefully someday will find him.
And that was my October 21st, 2025 interview with Jeff Heggie, retired police officer and current administrative officer for the Milford Police Department in Ohio. I thank him for joining me and all of you on this episode. I also thank the powers that be in the department for permitting Jeff to appear. As you could tell, map analysis is very important in this case. So I made a video. You can find it on Unfound's YouTube channel. Chuck's disappearance is one of those cases where everybody, including myself, has every right to be very sure about what happened. He talked about swimming in the river. He had mental health issues. The river is right there. The river was fast and deep at the time. Yep, everybody, once again including myself, is so dang sure that he went into the river. But we wouldn't bet our lives on it. But we wouldn't bet our 401ks on it. But we wouldn't bet our houses and condos on it. In fact, we wouldn't even bet our checking accounts on it. So then, how sure are we? This mile-wide but only millimeter-thick confidence is then coupled with enough facts, although not many, to maybe even push us in another direction. Well, with all those people living in the facility, how is it that nobody saw Chuck return from dinner or leave if he went to the river? How convenient is it that the complex didn't have any video cameras in the section where Chuck lived? Chuck was a big man who obviously loved to eat. You mean he really didn't finish that cake? Why would the ex-wife's husband be so cagey about who was with him that day when dumping stuff at the facility's trash bin? Yep, this is why being so sure about any disappearance is tough, even one like Chuck's. It's also why it's useless and a waste of time to be arguing on Reddit at 3 a.m. over competing theories for a disappearance. Don't do that. Overall, for Chuck's case, I think to this point the Milford Police have done everything they could have. In fact, they've done a great job considering that no one knew Chuck was missing for a week. And I look forward to the day when I can interview not just Jeff, but all the investigators once they close this case. If you'd like to hear and read more of my in-depth analysis into the disappearance of Chuck Jones, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. Sign up and partake in the Unfound blog. It's like getting another podcast every week. Until then, I leave the public theorizing up to you. And that's the program. I'm Ed Densel, and you've been listening to Unfound.